year ago, during a school shooting, my teacher, Miss Brown, refused to let us take cover. As the gunfire drew closer, she even blocked the light switch, standing guard. When I pleaded with her to let us hide, her response was chilling: sit down, or you're expelled. I could only stare, frozen. Just last week, she was finally led away from her home in handcuffs. I was in Miss Brown's AP history class when the emergency message crackled over the loudspeaker: lockdown. Lockdown. This is not a drill. It was a familiar phrase. We'd practiced those drills countless times since kindergarten: lights out, huddle in the corner, total silence. Instinctively, everyone began to move, but Miss Brown cut us off. She stood at the front, wearing that familiar glare she used whenever her authority was questioned. Return to your desks immediately, she commanded, her voice cutting through the rising tension. I haven't authorized any lockdown practice today. Out of habit, my hand shot up. But Miss Brown, we're supposed to. The only rules you follow are mine. Sit down, or everyone here gets a 0 on their presentations. Then came her usual tirade about respect, her "I've been teaching for 25 years" speech, and how her generation didn't need constant coddling. Miss Brown was the kind of teacher who strictly enforced minor rules but was shockingly negligent in her actual teaching duties. She'd mark you absent for being 30 seconds late, yet hand out A's on essays she clearly hadn't bothered to read. I once slipped a paragraph about SpongeBob into the middle of an essay to test her. I still got a 98. So, most of us grudgingly returned to our seats, unwilling to risk our grades over what seemed like just another routine drill. But then the announcement came again, urgent and clear: code red. This is a code red. All staff and students, follow lockdown procedures immediately. That never happened during drills. My stomach lurched, a sickening sensation far worse than the one I got before a test I hadn't studied for. My gaze kept darting to the door. The hallway lights remained on. In drills, teachers always killed the lights instantly. Then came the popping sounds, like firecrackers, but distinctly not. Phones started buzzing. I discreetly checked mine under my desk. My boyfriend, Tyler, 2 halls away in chemistry, texted, hiding in supply closet. Someone has a gun. Where are you? More messages poured in, behind filing cabinet in main office. Under Mr. Garcia's desk. I nervously showed Miss Brown my phone. My boyfriend says there's someone with a... I understand exactly what you're trying to do, she interrupted sharply. You're attempting to stage a prank to get me into trouble. The sounds intensified, closer now. A scream echoed from the hallway, not a playful one. That's probably just drama class rehearsing, Miss Brown said, though her voice lacked conviction. I glanced across the hall at Mr. Peterson's room. It was dark, utterly still. My hands trembled as I texted Tyler: Henderson won't let us hide. Still at desks. He replied instantly: what? Get to safety now. Ben, always the gentle one, spoke up next. Miss Brown, please. This feels real. Feelings aren't facts. Sit down, Ben. More footsteps thundered in the hallway, all running in the same direction, fleeing something. The PA crackled again, then abruptly cut out mid-word. Then came the gunshots. Not pops. Bang. 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 They were sharp, loud, undeniably real. I stood up. We need to hide now. Sit down or you're expelled, Miss Brown snapped, stepping squarely in front of the light switch. I will not lose my job because you kids want to play games. Something inside me snapped. I don't care. I lunged for the lights. The room erupted into chaos. Half the class scrambled to the corner, the rest froze, caught between ingrained rules and raw instinct. Miss Brown grabbed my arm, yelling about disrespect. You're being hysterical. This paranoia is from social media, manufactured fear. No one listened. Desks screeched as we pushed them against the door, forming a barricade. Someone cried. Someone prayed. The frozen students finally joined us, 23 teenagers desperately trying to disappear. Everyone except Miss Brown, who stood stiffly at her desk, arms crossed, absolutely furious. The doorknob rattled. We held our breath. The handle turned, but it was locked. A shadow passed under the door, paused. I could hear breathing, or perhaps it was just my own pounding heart. Then the footsteps moved away. Those 10 seconds felt like an eternity. The SWAT team found us 40 minutes later. Miss Brown was still rambling about how we'd overreacted to a simple drill. A week later, we learned the truth. They told us who the shooter was: Jake Wilson, from my sophomore English class. The quiet kid who was always sketching anime in his notebook. A paramedic wrapped a blood pressure cover on my arm as I sat shaking on a gurney, despite it being May. She kept checking my pulse and asking if I could breathe, but all I could think about was Jake walking past our door. Jake with a gun. Jake, who I'd lent a pencil to just last week. Detective Santos crouched beside me, badge displayed, asking for my account of what happened. I recounted the announcement, Miss Brown keeping us at our desks, the escalating sounds. She jotted everything down, nodding when I mentioned turning off the lights myself. The parking lot was pure pandemonium, parents sprinting, news vans, ambulances wailing. My mom, still in her hospital scrubs, mascara smeared, burst through the police tape and pulled me into such a tight hug I gasped. She frantically checked me for injuries and demanded to know how a teacher could have left kids so exposed. Tyler's mom clutched him, sobbing, while he just stood there, shell-shocked. Detective Santos later pulled me aside and showed me my text to Tyler. She explained that 23 students had given identical accounts. Miss Brown, however, continued to insist it was all fake, even after the gunshots. 2 students died in the math hallway. 3 were hospitalized, all from classrooms that had followed lockdown procedures immediately, except for one girl hit by a bullet that pierced a door. My dad arrived and quietly led me to his truck. The radio remained off. We both flinched when a motorcycle roared past. Home felt unsettlingly normal, the smell of coffee, detergent, the silence. Dad made spaghetti, I just pushed it around my plate while my phone buzzed incessantly. Why didn't Miss Brown let you hide? That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed those 40 minutes over and over. The next morning, the school district called, school cancelled indefinitely, counselors available. Mom stayed home, but I locked my door, haunted by the thought of how close we came to not barricading. Channel 8 aired non-stop coverage of our school. Then Miss Brown's face appeared on screen, claiming she maintained control during chaos and saved us by staying calm. Mom threw the remote so hard it cracked the TV. Tyler sent a video from Mr. Peterson's dark classroom, everyone hidden, silent, while Miss Brown's voice could be heard through the wall talking about manufactured fear. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m., the exact moment she blocked the light switch. The video racked up 50,000 views in just 2 hours. The comments were brutal. I spent the following day jumping at every sound. Mom brought soup I couldn't touch. Our group chat was alight with talk of lawsuits, but I couldn't focus. That evening, Principal Foster called, stating the district required my written statement about Miss Brown. Mom informed him we'd be submitting it through our attorney, a detail that was news to me. The next morning, Ben's mom brought him over. He desperately needed to talk to someone who understood. We sat on the porch, our sentences starting and stopping, talking about almost staying seated, about what if I hadn't turned off the lights. His hands shook just like mine. Later, Tyler's parents dropped him off. We retreated to the backyard, under the oak tree. He rolled up his jeans, revealing dark bruises on his knees from hiding behind chemical shelves. His voice was flat as he recounted how close the shots came and his overwhelming sense of helplessness. We sat there for an hour, not directly discussing it, but not talking about anything else either. His fingers nervously picked at the splintered table. On the 5th day, Mom was on the phone. By noon, she'd located Rebecca Thompson, a lawyer specializing in school safety. Her downtown office was plastered with newspaper clippings, headlines about negligence lawsuits and school safety violations across the state. Rebecca reviewed Mom's notes and declared, what Miss Brown did went beyond poor judgment. Leaving students exposed during an active shooter situation was criminal endangerment. What's most disturbing is her continued insistence that it was all fake, even with gunshots echoing through the halls. What makes a teacher so certain real danger isn't real when every other classroom is already dark and hidden? She explained that other families were already initiating civil suits, though criminal charges would be determined by the district attorney's office. On the 6th day, a community meeting devolved into chaos. The moment Ms. Brown entered the civic center with her union representative, parents erupted in shouts. Yet she maintained the same unnervingly calm, rigid demeanor she'd had during the shooting, repeating that she'd acted according to her professional judgment. Someone threw a water bottle that smashed against the wall behind her, and security had to form a barrier to escort her out. That night, the detective called with a question that made me freeze. Had Miss Brown ever mentioned Jake Wilson in class since he'd been her student 3 years prior? His name was already circulating through whispers and group chats, though the news hadn't confirmed it yet. By the morning of the 7th day, I finally forced myself to shower and change after wearing the same clothes for days. Dad was at the stove making pancakes like it was any other Sunday, but both of us flinched when the doorbell rang. It was just a delivery guy dropping off a package. That instant of panic had become our new normal. That evening, the news confirmed what everyone already suspected, displaying Jake's yearbook photo from graduation, the quiet kid I barely remembered from freshman year. But then the anchor dropped the real bombshell. Jake Wilson had filed a formal complaint against teacher Patricia Brown 3 years ago for psychological abuse. Mom immediately grabbed her phone to call our lawyer, while Dad frantically searched online for any information about Jake's complaint. We discovered a school board transcript from 2021 that mentioned a sealed student complaint against staff, with dates that perfectly matched, though Miss Brown's name wasn't explicitly listed. On day 8, Tyler picked me up, and we drove to the empty mall parking lot, sitting with the engine off. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white before he finally whispered, she knew. He meant Miss Brown, that she must have known it might be Jake and yet kept us exposed. Ben then texted our class group chat with information his parents had uncovered. 3 former students from Jake's class recalled how Miss Brown had targeted him. A girl named Melissa recounted how Miss Brown failed Jake on a technicality that nearly prevented him from graduating. The collected stories painted a clear pattern of her singling out specific students. On day 9, the detective arrived at our house with a court order for Miss Brown's personnel file. She explained they'd found that Jake wasn't her only complaint, there were 6 others throughout her career, all sealed and quietly dismissed without any action. She needed my complete statement detailing everything Miss Brown said during the lockdown, every single word while we begged to hide. I sat at the kitchen table with the blank statement form, my pen hovering, as Mom made coffee. The first line requested a description of events. I wrote 3 words, then crossed them out. Tried again. Erased that too. How do you possibly describe someone so consumed by their own authority that they can't fathom being wrong? The detective patiently waited while I rewrote my thoughts 6 times, struggling to articulate how Miss Brown stood blocking the light switch as the shots came closer. Finally, I just wrote down exactly what she said and did, step by step, no opinions, only facts. On day 10, a news alert popped up while I was eating breakfast. The school board had placed Miss Brown on administrative leave pending investigation. It sounded promising until I read the teachers' union statement beneath it, labeling it a rush to judgment against a dedicated educator with 25 years of service. The comments section already had 300 posts, half praising her as a hero for staying calm, half demanding her arrest. Mom shut my laptop, telling me to stop reading, but I'd already seen my name appear 14 times. That afternoon, Principal Foster came by, looking utterly exhausted. He sat on the couch, staring at his hands, explaining how there had been complaints for years, parents saying Miss Brown was too strict, too harsh. But she had tenure, her students consistently scored well, so nothing ever happened. His voice cracked when he mentioned the 2 kids who didn't survive. Day 11 began with my phone exploding with notifications at 6 a.m. Someone had leaked Jake's manifesto before the FBI could block it. 3 pages detailing his grievances against Ms. Brown, how she failed him on his senior thesis over a missing footnote, how that grade cost him his dream. College, how she laughed when he asked to fix it. The details made my skin crawl, dates, times, even recordings, proof of his deep-seated obsession and anger. Our lawyer, Rebecca, called an emergency meeting that night. All 23 families from Ms. Brown's class packed into a Holiday Inn conference room. She stood at the front and dropped the bomb. The district had known about Jake's fixation on Ms. Brown because his therapist had warned them 2 months before the shooting. The room erupted, parents shouting, crying, demanding answers as Rebecca tried to explain mandatory reporting laws and liability. On day 12, I woke up to 47 Instagram notifications. Ms. Brown had appeared on a podcast called Truth in Education, portraying herself as the victim of woke culture and teenage hysteria. She used my full name, called me a troubled student with attendance problems, and twisted my grandmother's funeral into me skipping class for fun. The host readily agreed with her, stating, "Kids today are soft, can't handle structure, need safe spaces instead of real education." Rebecca filed a cease and desist order within 2 hours, but the episode already had 12,000 downloads. My Instagram was flooded with strangers calling me a liar, an attention seeker, and a crisis actor. Someone even found Mom's hospital work number and started calling, asking if she was proud of raising a daughter who ruins teachers' lives. On day 13, Tyler arrived with his sleeping bag and stayed on my bedroom floor because neither of us could bear to be alone anymore. At 3 a.m., we lay awake in silence. He kept replaying that day, convinced he could have pulled the fire alarm from the chemistry room, that it might have saved everyone. The what-ifs ate us both alive, and there was nothing to say that could fix it. The next morning, Ms. Brown's husband, a local real estate agent, launched a GoFundMe for her legal defense. It hit $30,000 in just 6 hours. The page decried it as a witch hunt against a dedicated teacher, featuring photos of her smiling at graduations beside successful former students, conveniently omitting anyone who didn't fit that image. People from other states donated, posting comments about how liberals are destroying education. On day 14, Ben's mom called to say they were withdrawing from the group lawsuit. Her voice trembled as she explained that Ben's dad's construction company had just lost 3 major contracts. She kept insisting they couldn't prove it was connected, but everyone knew Ms. Brown's brother-in-law ran the biggest development firm in town and played golf with half the city council. Daniel Harris, a student from my grade, found me at the coffee shop that afternoon, his phone trembling in his hand as he slid into the seat across from me. He'd been hiding in the main office during everything, pressed behind the secretary's desk where he could see the security monitors, and he'd recorded it all on his phone without even realizing it. The footage was grainy but clear enough, Ms. Brown walking down the hallway 30 seconds after the first shots. She wasn't running or ducking, just walking calmly as if it were any normal passing period, while Mr. Peterson's door was already barricaded and Mrs. Garcia's students were under their desks. Daniel sent the video to Detective Santos right there, his hands shaking so badly he kept missing the buttons. Day 15. I returned to therapy for the first time since middle school, when my parents divorced. Dr. Patel's office looked identical, fake plants, beige walls, that white noise machine that was supposed to be calming but only sounded like static. I told her about the shadow under the door, about still hearing Ms. Brown calling us hysterical while people died down the hall. She took notes on her yellow pad and asked how my body reacted when I remembered it. Daniel's video hit Twitter before dinner, and by midnight #BrownNew was trending with 40,000 retweets. People slowed it down, zoomed in, catching her checking her phone while other teachers dragged kids into classrooms. The timestamp proved it was after the shooting started. News vans surrounded Daniel's house, and his parents had to send him to stay with his aunt in Boston. On day 16, Detective Santos called me in to review the footage with a state specialist who pointed at the screen with her pen. She highlighted how there was no startled response when the shots went off, no hint of surprise, just a calm, deliberate choice to keep walking. They were building a case for willful endangerment, which could carry a sentence of up to 5 years in prison. Mom picked me up from the station and drove straight to the district office to file paperwork for homeschooling. Ms. Brown calmly walking while others barricaded doors was the kind of image lawyers dream of and insurers dread. Mom took 3 weeks of vacation she'd saved for years, saying she didn't care about college applications, she cared that I was alive. We both broke down crying in the kitchen as the pasta boiled over. On day 17, Ms. Brown's lawyer held a major press conference on the courthouse steps, flanked by 3 of her former students in suits. One, now a state senator, spoke about rushing to judgment and promised to investigate the investigation. The lawyer claimed the video was doctored and demanded an independent analysis. Tyler's parents didn't wait. They transferred him to St. Mary's private school that very day. His mom declared they couldn't wait for the system to sort things out. He texted constantly, feeling guilty for leaving, but I urged him to go, to get out while he could. Our phones became a lifeline, both of us waking at 3 a.m. just to confirm the other was still there. On day 18, sleep eluded me again, so I started searching Ms. Brown's name online. I found an old Reddit thread from 2019 asking, "Who is your worst teacher?" 3 users mentioned her by name, describing her mind games and how she'd pick one student each year to torment. The thread had been deleted, but I located a cached version on the Wayback Machine. I took screenshots and sent them to our lawyer. Day 19. The school board meeting descended into chaos as parents screamed across the auditorium. Half demanded Ms. Brown's arrest, the others argued she was being scapegoated. One woman shouted that Ms. Brown had saved those kids by maintaining order. Ben's dad, even after withdrawing from the lawsuit, stood and yelled that she nearly got them all killed. Security had to clear the room as people shoved and argued in the parking lot. Rebecca Harris, Daniel's mom, filed for a restraining order the next morning after Ms. Brown's supporters started appearing at our houses, taking photos of our front doors and posting our addresses online. The judge said that without direct threats, it was merely free speech. Rebecca cried in court as he explained that taking pictures from public property wasn't illegal. That same night, unable to sleep, I scrolled endlessly through comments defending Ms. Brown. Around 3 a.m., something in me snapped. I opened my laptop and pulled up the released audio from that day. The official timeline was now public, so I synced Ms. Brown's words with the sounds of gunfire in the background. Setting my phone against my desk lamp, I hit record and began reading from the transcript. I didn't approve any lockdown drill today. Bang. Sit down or you're all getting zeros. Bang. Bang. My hands trembled, but I kept going, every line she uttered while kids died down the hall. I posted it on TikTok at 4:17 a.m., expecting nothing. By noon, it had 2 million views and was still climbing. Other students began creating videos too, showing how their teachers reacted. Mrs. Garcia had her class under desks in 8 seconds. Mr. Peterson had everyone in the storage closet before the second announcement. Coach Williams carried 2 frozen freshmen into the equipment room. Every teacher except Ms. Brown had their students hidden within 30 seconds. The hashtags exploded, hashtag teacher save students for the heroes, and hashtag Brown chose control for us, still sitting at our desks as gunshots echoed. That night around 2 a.m., Tyler showed up at my house without warning. His mom had found him having a panic attack and driven him over. We sat in my driveway until sunrise, sharing earbuds, listening to old playlists from before everything changed. He kept whispering the same words over and over, like a prayer. The next morning, the district attorney held a press conference, 23 counts of reckless endangerment of a minor, 1 for each student in our class. Ms. Brown turned herself in wearing a navy suit, her teaching awards pinned like medals. Cameras caught her walking up the courthouse steps with her chin held high and a faint smile. Her bail hearing that afternoon set bond at $50,000. Her supporters launched a GoFundMe before she was even processed. 2 hours and 17 minutes later, they'd raised the full amount. She walked out still smiling and stopped to speak to reporters. Mom had to grab my arms and pull me back to the car when Ms. Brown started talking about vindication and control. The victims' families began meeting every Wednesday at the community center, but I couldn't bring myself to go. Mom went instead and came home with red eyes, holding me tighter each time without a word. Ben texted a photo his mom had found while cleaning old PTA files, Jake Wilson's junior year essay covered in Ms. Brown's angry red ink comments. The essay seemed fine, but her notes were vicious, lazy thinking, disappointing effort. At the bottom, she'd scrawled, discuss your future in my course. The next day, Detective Santos called. They found 6 more complaints against Ms. Brown spanning 15 years, all from male students, all alleging psychological manipulation. Every case had been dropped after closed-door meetings with administration. She sounded weary as she said this wasn't uncommon. Principal Foster resigned during an emergency press conference. Standing at the podium, he admitted he'd failed us, that Ms. Brown should have been removed years ago, but he chose the easy way out. Reporters looked stunned to hear anyone actually take responsibility. 2 days later, Ms. Brown's lawyer filed a $5 million countersuit against the district, claiming they were scapegoating her for their own security failures. My phone buzzed with the headline while I sat in Dr. Patel's waiting room, and I actually laughed out loud at the sheer audacity. The next day, Rebecca called a meeting at the community center. All 23 families showed up. She stood at the front handing out stacks of papers, explaining that we weren't just defending ourselves anymore, we were filing criminal complaints with the state board and launching a federal civil rights lawsuit. Parents signed forms, exchanged numbers, and Rebecca's assistant typed notes on her laptop. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I found an old notebook and started writing everything down, every word Ms. Brown said during those 47 minutes, how she blocked the light switch, threatened us with zeros and expulsion as gunshots came closer. Dr. Patel said writing helps process trauma, but it felt more like building a case. 3 days later, my phone exploded again. A group of Ms. Brown's former students had launched a website called Survivors of Room 203. I clicked the link and saw testimony after testimony, 37 stories in the first few days. Students from 10 years ago described the same behavior, public humiliation when questioned, grades dropping after defiance, manipulative mind games that made them doubt themselves. The pattern was undeniable. A local reporter contacted Mom asking if I'd do an interview. My hands shook when the camera started rolling, but my voice stayed steady. I told them exactly what happened, how she looked at us while gunshots echoed and chose control over our lives. The segment aired that night, and my phone buzzed nonstop for hours. Ben surprised everyone the next day by posting his own story on Instagram despite his parents' protests. He wrote that he'd almost stayed seated because he was more afraid of Ms. Brown's punishment than dying, and that I'd saved his life by defying her. Within 3 hours, his post had 10,000 shares. That afternoon, an FBI agent called my parents with new information. Jake had texted a friend the night before the shooting about Ms. Brown destroying him in front of everyone. The friend had deleted the messages out of guilt, but investigators recovered them from the phone company's servers. The text explicitly detailed Jake's plans and his hatred toward Ms. Brown. 2 days later, news broke that her husband had filed for divorce and moved out overnight. Court documents showed he'd been planning it for months, but the shooting pushed his timeline forward. Even her own husband was leaving. I went back to school to collect my things as the semester ended. Room 203 was still sealed with crime scene tape. The hallway felt wrong, smelling of industrial cleaner trying to hide something else. I grabbed my stuff from my locker quickly while Tyler waited outside with the car running. The prosecution brought in an expert, Dr. Catherine Mills, who specialized in crisis response. After 3 days of reviewing the evidence, her conclusion was harsh. Ms. Brown violated every protocol and showed gross negligence that endangered our lives. Seeing her supporters raise $50,000 in just 2 hours made me question who had that kind of money and motivation to defend someone who kept kids seated during gunfire. Her report, 50 pages long, stated in formal terms that Ms. Brown chose control over children. Then her supporters organized a rally at the courthouse, a disaster. The parents of the 2 students who died came as counter-protesters. When someone yelled that Brown did nothing wrong, one of the mothers collapsed, sobbing on the courthouse steps. The photo went viral within minutes, showing how divided our town was. News vans from 3 states arrived. That weekend, Tyler's mom held a support group at the community center, where 23 survivors sat in a circle. A girl from Mr. Peterson's class twisted her hair as she talked about how their teacher flipped desks to make a barrier. Another student described being pulled into the chemical storage room and having the door blocked. Every story was the same, except ours. Their teachers protected them. Ours almost got us killed. One girl looked at me and said, "We shouldn't have had to save ourselves," and everyone nodded. The State Board of Education finally launched an investigation on day 35 after media pressure. Rebecca called to say they were subpoenaing 10 years of records. Investigators found 17 formal complaints against Ms. Brown that were never properly recorded. Criminal charges against the administrators who covered for her were now possible. That night, Mom arranged dinner with Tyler's family. We sat at the table, pushing food around our plates. His dad tried to talk about college, but the words hung heavy in the air. His mom mentioned summer vacation, then froze when a car backfired outside. We all jumped. We pretended we weren't changed, that loud noises didn't make us flinch, that shadows didn't make our hearts race. On day 40, I stood at the state capitol building, speaking into a microphone before 300 people. The legislative committee sat behind their desk as I read my statement. I said Ms. Brown weaponized her authority while a weapon was in our school. She chose ego over lives. I asked how many complaints it takes before someone acts. The representatives just stared when I finished. 2 days later, a custodian named Frank contacted our lawyer with something major, security footage from 3 years earlier, recorded by an old camera system no one knew was still running. It showed Jake leaving Ms. Brown's class in tears, punching a wall until his knuckles bled. The timestamp matched the day he filed his complaint. The footage had never been reviewed. On day 42, Ben's family rejoined the lawsuit. His dad's company suddenly regained its contracts the same day the FBI started investigating Ms. Brown's brother-in-law for witness tampering. His dad said some things mattered more than money, but we all knew the truth. The brother-in-law backed down once federal agents appeared. The grand jury met the next week and upgraded Ms. Brown's charges to attempted murder through depraved indifference. Her lawyer called it prosecutorial overreach, but the DA said keeping children exposed during an active shooter situation showed extreme disregard for human life. Experts on TV said this charge usually applied to drunk driving deaths, but this case could set a precedent. Tyler got early admission to State University on day 45 but deferred for a gap year. That night, we sat on my porch as he explained he couldn't leave me to face the trial alone. We both knew this wasn't teenage love, it was something darker, bound by shared survival. Day 47 was my first truly good day since the shooting. I went 6 hours without thinking about it while helping Mom clean the garage, then guilt hit hard. How could I forget, even for a minute, when 2 kids were dead? Dr. Patel said healing isn't linear, but it felt like betrayal. On day 50, the state board held a hearing to revoke Ms. Brown's teaching license. She came in a black suit, calling it a lynching of a dedicated educator. When they showed testimonials from 37 former students describing her behavior, she called them weak children who couldn't handle high standards. Board members recoiled from their microphones. The chair had to call for order twice when Ms. Brown started shouting about cancel culture. They voted unanimously to revoke her license and referred her case to the Attorney General for further charges spanning her career. The next weeks blurred into legal meetings and therapy until, on day 52, Detective Santos called with news that made my hands shake so badly I dropped my phone. She'd been reviewing old personnel files at the district office when she unearthed a sealed folder from 2009 about Ms. Brown's transfer from Westfield High. A student there had attempted to take her own life and left a 3-page note naming Ms. Brown for the daily humiliation and mind games that drove her to that point. The school quietly transferred Ms. Brown to our district instead of investigating, as the superintendent's wife was her cousin. Within hours of Detective Santos leaking this to a reporter friend, my phone exploded with notifications from a Facebook group called Survivors of Patricia Brown that already had 200 members. Former students from 3 schools were sharing stories spanning 25 years, about her tactics, the public shaming, the way she'd give conflicting instructions, then punish kids for being confused, and how she'd gaslight them about things she'd said minutes earlier. One girl from 1998 wrote that Ms. Brown told her she was too stupid for college in front of the whole class, then denied it when her parents complained. Another kid from 2003 said Ms. Brown made him stand before everyone while she listed everything wrong with his essay, mocking his stutter. The pattern was always the same, protected by administrators who found it easier to move her than deal with complaints. 2 days later, my mom drove me to meet the Johnsons and the Garcias, whose kids, Michael and Sophia, died in the shooting because they stayed at their desks following Ms. Brown's orders. Mrs. Johnson held my hand, tears streaming, saying she didn't blame any of us survivors. Mr. Garcia's voice broke when he said, "We fought to save ourselves while their children never got the chance because they followed the rules." We sat there crying together for an hour, looking at photos of Michael and Sophia at prom, just 3 weeks before they died. Rebecca called that afternoon with updates on the prosecution's strategy, and what she told me made me run to the bathroom to throw up. They had evidence Ms. Brown knew Jake was likely targeting her from past incidents where he confronted her after class, but she kept us exposed as psychological torture. Prosecutors planned to argue she used us as human shields for her ego, that she'd rather risk our lives than admit she was wrong about the lockdown. The truth was worse than any of us imagined. She saw us as props in her power game, even with a shooter in the building. By day 56, the district's lawyers panicked and offered a $30 million settlement to all families, admitting no wrongdoing but acknowledging oversight failures. Some accepted it right away, unable to afford long legal battles, but my parents and 12 other families held out for justice, not money. 2 days later, Tyler took me to visit the memorial outside the school, hundreds of flowers, teddy bears, and photos covering the steps. Someone had left a copy of the student handbook, lockdown procedures highlighted in yellow, with a note, "These rules save lives when teachers follow them." We stood holding hands, reading the messages, when Tyler spotted something that made him squeeze my fingers hard. Between 2 bouquets lay a printed copy of Jake's manifesto, the same one defense teams had just gotten. 5 pages detailing Ms. Brown's methods like a psychological torture manual. He documented humiliation, confusing instructions, gaslighting, each example dated, with witnesses. The FBI confirmed every incident through interviews. That same week, Ms. Brown's former teaching assistant from 2015 broke her silence on the local news. She said she quit after 1 semester because she couldn't bear to watch what Ms. Brown did to students anymore. She'd even reported it to Principal Foster, but nothing happened since Ms. Brown had tenure and the union protected her. Another adult who chose the easy path over protecting kids. Frank, the custodian, finding forgotten security footage on an old system was like a movie twist, but sometimes real life does hand you evidence when you need it most. Ben's deposition came on day 62. His parents sent me the transcript later, proud of how strong he was. His voice never wavered when he said, "Ms. Brown taught U.S. authority was more important than safety." But that day, I taught everyone survival matters more. When asked if he blamed me for defying her, he said I was the only adult in the room who acted like one, that a 17-year-old girl showed more leadership than a woman with 25 years experience. The next morning, the FBI raided Ms. Brown's brother-in-law's house for witness tampering after catching him on a wiretap threatening Ben's dad's business partners to make him change testimony. Her whole support system crumbled. People saw how far she'd go to protect herself, hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on families, using her brother-in-law to pressure witnesses. 2 weeks later, I sat with Rebecca at our kitchen table, notes spread everywhere, writing my victim impact statement. She told me not to hold back. The jury needed to know everything Ms. Brown did that day. Tyler sat beside me, his hand on my knee, while I wrote about her keeping us at our desks as a shooter walked the halls. I wrote until my hand cramped, then typed more. The words came out angry, then sad, then just tired. Rebecca read it and nodded. It would show the jury the truth. 2 days later, the clerk called. The trial was set for 3 months away. I tried going back to normal, SAT prep, college applications. But how do you write about your future when you almost didn't have one? The Common App asked about a challenge I'd overcome. I stared at the blank page for hours. Then, on day 70, Ben texted, Ms. Brown had emailed his parents saying he was confused about what happened and should get therapy to remember correctly. The prosecutor had her arrested within 2 hours. News vans caught her being led out in cuffs, shouting she was being persecuted for maintaining order. At the emergency hearing, the prosecutor showed the email and said she violated bail by contacting witnesses. The judge didn't even let her lawyer finish before revoking bail. As they cuffed her, she knocked over her water glass, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She looked right at me, realizing she wasn't in control anymore. 2 nights later, Mom found me at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., surrounded by essay drafts. My Common App essay was about choosing to survive despite my teacher's orders. Mom said I didn't have to write it if it was too hard. I told her I did, because that's who I was now. 3 months later, on a cold Monday, the trial began. The prosecutor's opening included audio from my class project. You could hear gunshots, students crying, and Ms. Brown's voice saying we were being hysterical. Jurors covered their mouths. Ms. Brown sat in a gray suit, still acting like a victim. I testified for 4 hours, walking through every second of those 47 minutes, where everyone sat, what she said, how she blocked the light switch. Her lawyer tried painting me as rebellious, but I stayed calm and repeated facts. When asked why I defied her order, I said, I chose to live while she chose her ego. The room went silent. On day 3, Tyler testified about my text from that closet, his voice cracking when he thought I was dead. The judge overruled objections, saying the jury needed to hear it. On day 4, enhanced audio revealed Ms. Brown's voice right after the first shots. If this is real, they deserve what they get for not respecting me. The courtroom gasped. Parents screamed. The judge called a recess. Day 5, Ms. Brown took the stand, insisting we were never in danger, that she was persecuted for having standards. The prosecutor let her speak, then asked one question. Did you recognize Jake Wilson's voice outside the classroom? Ms. Brown froze, then whispered yes. The courtroom erupted. When calm returned, the prosecutor asked if she knew it was the same Jake Wilson who'd filed complaints against her. Ms. Brown's face turned pale. Then she snapped, yelling that Jake needed to learn respect. The jury looked stunned. 3 weeks later, verdict day. The jury took 6 hours, guilty on all counts. 23 charges of endangering children, plus depraved indifference. Ms. Brown collapsed in her chair, finally scared. The judge said she faced up to 25 years, families sobbed. At sentencing, my hands shook as I read my statement. I told her she taught me that control without care was cruelty. That I'd carry those 47 minutes forever, but she'd have to carry her choices. The judge gave her 18 years, parole possible after 12. Even in cuffs, she said she was just keeping standards. She still didn't understand, and that was the worst part. A month later, Tyler and I watched workers install metal detectors and cameras at school. We were different now, connected by what happened. He took my hand and said, we survived. This time, it wasn't a question. That spring, Ben gave a powerful speech to the school board about fixing how teacher complaints were handled. No student should have to pick between their grades and staying alive. I started at State University that fall, majoring in education policy. Someone had to fix this. My roommate didn't know my story, and for a few weeks, I was just Brianna, not the shooting girl. It felt good but strange keeping that truth inside. In November, they reopened room 203 as a memorial classroom and asked me to speak. Standing where Ms. Brown once stood felt surreal, but I said protecting kids isn't just about locks and drills, it's about listening when they say something's wrong. On the way home for winter break, we passed the school. Kids played basketball outside like nothing ever happened. I told Mom they looked so young. She said we all did back then. I knew I'd never be that young again. Innocence died that day too. Over the holidays, Tyler and I met at our old coffee shop. We still checked exits, still jumped at sudden sounds, but we were learning to live again. Tyler squeezed my hand and said we were writing new chapters now. The scars would always be there, but we were more than what happened in room 203. We were the kids who refused to stay in our seats when standing up meant staying alive. Thanks for letting me wonder about all this with you today. It's been quite the journey asking questions together. Take care. Like the video.